If you're going to increase airflow on a blower, you need to figure out what the motor is currently operating at for horsepower, figure out what your RPM change is going to be, and see if your motor will actually handle that. In order to do this, you'd use this formula up here to figure out what your motor is operating at currently. So that is nameplate horsepower times actual amps read with an amp meter divided by full load amps. So here's the nameplate data off the motor. It's 10 horsepower, its full load amps are 37.7. Your amp meter reading is 16 amps at 3000 CFM. So step one is plug this information into the equation. You'll end up with 10 horsepower times 16 run load amps divided by 37.7 full load amps. So step two is 10 horsepower times 0.424, which ends up being you're using 4.2 horsepower of this 10 horse motor at 16 amps. Now, this is the requirement when the airflow increases. So now we got to use this formula to figure out what we're gonna need. So existing horsepower times the new RPM divided by the existing RPM cubed. So if we need to increase our current RPM from 875 to 1167 RPM to go from 3000 CFM to 4000 CFM, what new horsepower motor are we going to need, or will this one work? So plug that information into it. So we're using 4.2 at 3000 CFM horsepower. We take that times our new RPM divided by our old RPM cubed. So we'll end up doing 4.2 on step 2 times 1.337 cubed. Step 3 is 4.2 times 2.3723. So we end up in step 4, our new horsepower that we're going to need is 9.96 horsepower to increase the RPM from 875 to 1167. So our 10 horse motor would work for this. But one thing to keep in mind is if you look at when we increased our RPM from 875 to 1167, so if you divide 1167 by 875, it ends up being 1.337, or it's a 133% increase in RPM. But look at the horsepower. So the new horsepower needed is 9.96 divided by 4.2. So this ends up being 2.35, or 235% increase in required horsepower. So that's not a linear conversion. So if you go up in RPM, you're going to use more horsepower. It's not going to be 1 RPM to 1 horse, or it's not linear. So as the RPM goes up, your new horsepower requirement is going to go up even faster.